There's a fire inside you can't ignore. Stand still? Not a chance. You're a lifelong learner who's come this far. Now, we're here to help you keep going further. Capella University. What can't you do? Visit capella.edu to learn more.
Hey listeners, this is Peter and welcome back to the History Shorts. Today's episode is brought to you by the Podcast Republic, your ultimate listening app. Discover and subscribe to thousands of podcasts from around the world. Download Podcast Republic today, available on Google Play and the Apple App Store. Today on History Shorts. When people think of World War I, they picture the muddy trenches of the Western Front, the Somme, Verdun, where millions of Europeans perished in a war of attrition. But far from France and Flanders, another campaign was unfolding, in the Pacific and East Asia, where Japan, then just a rising empire, waged its own war against its future friend and ally, Germany. It was a war of opportunity, fought not for survival but for ambition. In 1914, Japan entered the Great War not as a victim, but as a hunter, seizing Germany's colonies, projecting power into China, and announcing to the world that it had joined the ranks of global empires. Today's episode will end with a history brief where we go back to John and Claire Whitcomb's Oh Say Can You See and some forgotten anecdotes from American history. A quick word from our sponsors.
You don't just live in your home, you live in your neighborhood as well. So when you're shopping for a home, you want to know as much about the area around it as possible. Luckily, Homes.com has got you covered. Each listing features a comprehensive neighborhood guide from local experts. Everything you'd ever want to know about a neighborhood, including the number of homes for sale, transportation, local amenities, cultural attractions, unique qualities, and even things like median lot size and a noise score. Homes.com. We've done your homework.
This day in history. On February 19, 1942, Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, authorizing the forced relocation of over 120,000 Japanese Americans during World War II. On February 19, 1878, inventor Thomas Edison patented the phonograph, allowing sound to be recorded and played back for the first time. Story of the day. 50 years before World War I, Japan had been an isolated feudal nation. Then came the Meiji Restoration of 1868, which transformed the country into a modern industrial power. By 1905, Japan had already stunned the world by defeating Russia, a European empire in its own right, and in a modern war, making it clear that Asia had a new military force to be reckoned with. That victory turned Japan into both a symbol and a warning. To many Western powers, Japan's rise was impressive, but quite unsettling. And to Japan itself, it was proof that destiny favored the strong. So when Europe descended into war in 1914, Tokyo's leaders saw an opening. Since 1902, Japan had been formally allied with Great Britain through the Anglo-Japanese Alliance, an agreement that tied their fates in East Asia and the Pacific. So when Britain declared war on Germany, it asked Japan for help, mainly to deal with German ships threatening British trade in the Pacific. Japan naturally agreed, but its sights were set much higher. It actually wanted Germany's colonies, particularly Qingdao, the fortified port city in the Shandong province, China, as well as the scattered island territories Germany held across the Pacific. On August 15, 1914, Japan issued an ultimatum. Germany must withdraw its warships from East Asian waters and hand over Qingdao. Germany refused, and 8 days later, Japan declared war. Qingdao was Germany's prized outpost in China, complete with railways, fortresses, and one of Asia's finest harbors. When Japan's army and navy arrived in September of 1914, they came not as helpers but as conquerors. Joined by a small British detachment, Japan besieged the port for 2 months. German defenders, vastly outnumbered, fought fiercely, but in November, Qingdao fell. Japan raised the rising sun flag over the city, took thousands of prisoners, and seized control of all German possessions in the Pacific north of the equator. To Tokyo, it was a glorious triumph. To London, it was useful cooperation. To China, however, it was humiliation. Because instead of returning Qingdao to Chinese control, where it was originally taken from, Japan occupied it and then refused to leave. Flush with victory, Japan decided to press its advantage. In early 1915, it presented China with an ultimatum known as the 21 Demands, a sweeping set of conditions that would have given Japan control over much of China's economy, railroads, and even its government. China reluctantly signed under threat of invasion. The move outraged Chinese nationals and alarmed the Western powers, but they were too busy fighting Germany in Europe to intervene. For Japan, it was a diplomatic and territorial victory. For China, it was the start of decades of bitterness and mistrust. Japan's role in the Great War didn't end there. Its navy patrolled vast stretches of the Pacific, hunting down German commerce raiders and protecting Allied shipping routes. In 1917, Japan even sent destroyers to the Mediterranean Sea to escort British convoys, rescuing hundreds of sailors from German submarine attacks. It was a small but significant contribution, proof that Japan had become a global naval power. Yet, for all its loyalty, the West still saw Japan as different, as an outsider in a white man's war. When the war finally ended in 1918, Japan arrived at the Paris Peace Conference as one of the victorious powers, sitting alongside Britain, France, Italy, and the United States. Its diplomats had three goals. One was to keep the former German territories that it had seized in China and the Pacific, and to be treated as an equal among the great powers, and lastly to secure a new principle, a racial equality clause in the League of Nations Charter. The first goal they achieved. The islands became Japanese mandates under the League of Nations, and Japan retained control of Qingdao for the time being. But the second and third goals, equality and respect, well, those were denied. The racial equality proposal, which simply declared that all nations should be treated equally, was quietly blocked by Britain and the United States. It was a devastating insult. Japan had fought and bled for the Allies, yet was reminded that in Western eyes, it would never truly belong. This moment, this humiliation, would haunt Japan for decades. In the years after World War I, Japan's economy boomed. Its industries profited from Europe's devastation, but politically, resentment festered. The denial of racial equality at Paris, combined with Western efforts to limit Japan's navy at the Washington Naval Conference of 1921, fed a dangerous belief among Japan's nationalists, namely that the Western powers would never accept Japan as an equal and only as a servant. This sense of betrayal, born in the aftermath of World War I, became the emotional fuel of a new generation of military leaders. They began to speak not of cooperation with the West, but of Japan's destiny to dominate Asia on its own terms. And in a bitter irony, the empire that had once fought against Germany would soon find itself allied with it. 2 decades after Japan's war against Germany, the world erupted again. This time, the alliances were reversed. In 1940, Japan joined Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy in a pact forming the Axis powers. The same nation that had once captured German colonies and fought for Britain now stood alongside Berlin in a war against the West. To outsiders, it seemed almost absurd, but to Japanese leaders, the logic was clear and rooted in the memory of 1919. They remembered the arrogance at Paris, the rejection of equality, the limits imposed by Western treaties. In their eyes, Japan's World War I victory had been a hollow one, a partnership that exposed Western hypocrisy. As Prime Minister Fumimaro Kono wrote in 1941, just months after Pearl Harbor, "We learned in the last war that cooperation with the West brings humiliation and not honor. This time, we shall seek our destiny alone." In their minds, aligning with Germany was not betrayal, it was actually revenge. They saw Hitler's defiance of Britain and the United States as the rebellion Japan itself had been denied in 1919. Of course, this new alliance would end in disaster, the destruction of Tokyo, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki. But even then, Japan's wartime rhetoric remained haunted by the irony of its earlier alliance, a war fought for Western acceptance that had instead bred alienation. The History Brief. The following excerpt comes to us from John and Clary Whitcomb's Oh Say, Can You See? When Sitting Bull toured with Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, he had a trick horse, which was given to him as a keepsake. The horse was outside his cabin on the reservation when policemen came to arrest Sitting Bull on the morning of December 18, 1890. The chief was being taken into custody as a precaution because the army was alarmed by the spread of the Indians' ghost dances. In the confused scuffle that followed, shots were fired and Sitting Bull was killed. His horse, though, thought the gunshots were the cue for his act and began doing his tricks. He sat down and raised one hoof, to the terror of the Indians who supposed that the spirit of Sitting Bull had entered his horse. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today and helping make this little show such a mighty success. If you're enjoying the show and would like to help me out with its production, you could always buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com or become a Patreon member to enjoy these episodes ad-free. Both of those links can be found on our website at www.historyshortspodcast.com. Have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you all again tomorrow.